Shall we?
Yes,
Yes.
let's go ahead.
Okay, fine. So, a very good morning to you all, and very warm welcome to our new students. And we are privileged to have Professor Sudarshan Ramaswamy with us, the Dean of Jindal School of Government and Public Policy, and also Professor Milindo Chakravarti, who is here to support us all. And it's a new beginning, and we hope that you are all safe and sound. And today we are going to commence our first session of pre-semester trading immersion and general engagement program, which is very popularly known as Prestige. We are privileged to have Professor Sudarshan with us. Welcome, Professor. Professor Sudarshan Ramaswamy has had distinguished careers in his domains of research, development, programming, and governance. After he obtained a master's degree in economics from the Delhi School of Economics, he was elected to a Rhodes Scholarship, and he joined Balliol College, University of Oxford, and obtained a master's degree in politics in 1977. He was elected to a research fellowship at St. John's College, University of Cambridge, where he studied judicial review of economic legislation by the Supreme Court of India, specializing in the interface of law and economics. In 1983, he was visiting scholar in the School of International Development, University of East Anglia. In 1984, he served in the Ford Foundation's South Africa office in New Delhi as assistant representative and program officer for human rights and social justice. In 1991, he joined the UNDP in India as senior economist and assistant representative for governance and public policy. In 2000, he served UNDP in Jakarta as its senior governance advisor. And in 2002, he was appointed policy advisor for justice and governance in the UNDP Oslo Governance Center. In 2005, he was transferred to UNDP Asia Pacific Center in Bangkok, where he was regional policy advisor for governance, human rights, rule of law, justice, and legal reforms. In 2012, he joined the O.P. Jindal Global University as the founding dean of Jindal School of Government and Public Policy. And he has an impressive track record of publication comprising books, articles, and UN policy reports, reflecting his interdisciplinary research, teaching, and policy experience in development programs, human development, law, governance, institutions, and policy. We are very much thankful to you, Professor, for joining us here. And I would request you now to please address our all students of public policy who had joined and are eager to join us on campus as well. Over to you.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hemant. That was somewhat of a long introduction, but I'm very happy to commence conversations and the dialogue with our students who have bestowed confidence in the Masters in Public Policy that our university and the School of Government and Public Policy is offering them. I first want to begin by stating something of the philosophy that motivated the Jindal Global University to start a program in public policy. Many of you may or may not know that public policy as a course of study, say a 2-year program, is a very, very popular and common course in the United States. But it's not been a part of the university curricula in India for a long time. And we were the first university in the country to start the MA in public policy. That doesn't mean public policy as a discipline was not taken seriously or studied. The assumption was that policy is made by government, and therefore only those who are already in government need think about and figure out how to make public policy, and those outside the government are, recipients or the objects to whom public policy is directed. And so you begin to study public policy even after you start in government. You have a very brief probationary period and in the Lal Bahadur Shastri Academy in Missouri, you have a course on public policy process, or the policy cycle, as it's called. And after that, people in government go off to work in the field, where their main job is to implement policy, not to make policy. And it's only after about 15 years when they come to a mid-career level and are likely to become a director or a joint secretary in the secretariat at a state capital or in the government of India, are they called upon to formulate policy or to think about policy making. And therefore, the institutions that focused on mid-career training for these officers are in many of the state administrative training institutes. The Shastri Academy in Missouri runs mid-career programs in public policy for these officers. And we also have the Institutes of Management. Initially, there was a program in Ahmedabad. It stopped. It's now been revived. And there's a program in the Institute of Management in Bangalore called the Center for Public Policy, which conducts these mid-career programs, and they are of a year-long duration at the most. None of them is 2 years. So this program that you all have joined is actually a pioneering program, in the sense that this is the first time that a 2-year public policy program is designed. Now, the reason why we didn't have it before is, as I said, the belief that policy is only the concern of someone who's already in government. Whereas in the United States, government itself is differently constituted than in the Commonwealth countries, which follow the British civil service pattern. In the United States, every time there's an election and the government changes, all people at the policy-making level automatically change. So whether it is at the city level, when the mayor changes, policymakers in the city level will change. When the state elections take place and the governor of a state changes, policy-making people in the state will change. And in the case of the federal government, when the United States president changes, policymakers change. So policymakers come lateral entrance into the US government. And knowing this for a long time, people in all sorts of professions, whether they are doctors or engineers or university professors, all of them felt it's a good idea to do a 2 years program in public policy so that they understand how government works, how they could contribute to policy if called upon, and just keep this degree in their pocket, so to speak, because it will come in useful and handy in case they are called upon to serve a government, right? So you got, for instance, the Surgeon General of the United States is really the Secretary Health in our equivalent terms. Usually it's a person with a medical background, but it's invariably someone who's also got a public policy degree, because you're really involved in policy making. So public policy as a program at the, say, the Kennedy School of Government and Public Policy, the Princeton School of International and Public Affairs, Cornell, Ithaca, all the Ivy League universities, Columbia, which has CEPA, have had these programs for a very long time. But we've, in the Commonwealth countries, as I say, it's more recent. And the reason it's more recent is because the style and attitude of the government has also changed. Many of you would have noticed that there's a lot of talk within India about taking people laterally into government, right? So that is lateral entry into government. This government also believes now increasingly, whether it's at the state level or at the national level, that they need to draw upon advice from outside the government. So ask think tanks like the Center for Policy Research in Delhi, the Observer Research Foundation, and the Vivekananda Foundation now increasingly. Our think tanks, which do analysis of evidence, data, propose background papers that help in the formulation of policy. National Council for Applied Economic Research, the National Institute of Public Finance and Policy. All of these institutions play an increasingly larger role now in the formulation of policy within government than they used to in the past, with the result that their remit has expanded, the number of staff that they employ has expanded, and that provides employment opportunities for you when you graduate with a degree in public policy, because this is a very valued qualification for these research think tanks. There are also increasingly in the corporate sector, companies like Google, Facebook, Twitter, all of them have very large public policy units where they employ public policy graduates in order to understand the implications of government policy for their businesses and for the clients whom they are serving. So there's a recognition now, if you want it in a sentence, that public policy is too important to be left only to those who are styled as policymakers who happen to be within the government. A lot of civil society organizations also employ graduates in public policy in order to be able to assess the implications of policy. So there could be many civil society institutions in our country will now produce analysis of the implications, say the new education policy. Now, to be able to do that, they need people who are trained and understand public policy, what it means to evaluate and appraise public policy, its impact, what is program evaluation, what is impact evaluation, what is needed to monitor progress in public policy, how to get feedback from the public or society about how the policy is working, and how to transmit that feedback back to policymakers so that they can make mid-course changes in policy as they happen. So the point is that, and then there's also a feature in India, because India requires all corporations which have a turnover of a certain amount in crores to set aside 2% of their pre-tax profit for what are called corporate social responsibility initiatives, which they must report to the government. And that means really employing, again, public policy specialists in a way, because what are these corporate social responsibility initiatives? They are mainly about promoting or increasing the supply of what are called public goods, not strictly speaking public goods. They should be, those of you who did some economics may understand why I'm saying not strictly speaking public goods, but they can be called merit goods. In other words, they are goods which have a lot of positive externalities, and therefore they are goods where government must make a greater investment. That's the idea, and so that again opens up a very large employment opportunities for graduates in public policy. So for all of these reasons, we were in a way caught up with what you might call an idea whose time has come in designing and crafting a course, a 2-year MA program which you have joined in public policy. What is the philosophy behind it? In earlier years, and also in the UPSC exams, you have a paper called public administration. And public administration is really focused about how implementation issues are being tackled, right? So who is responsible for implementing, say, education policy? Then you begin with the Constitution, and you will say education is a state subject in the Constitution, and therefore education up to school level is going to be implemented or managed by the state government. Higher education is in the concurrent list of the Constitution, where both the state government and the union government have powers to legislate and to create universities. The central government can create universities, state governments can create universities. And so there are these implementation issues. So public administration is not focused so much on policy formulation, policy design, and using evidence to formulate policy. It's more to do with the machinery of government and the machinery of implementation. So in a way, we need to lobby for the UPSC to change its curriculum or syllabus for the public service exams because they are woefully outdated. The texts which they prescribed were published in the 1960s because some rather elderly, and not to say I have anything against elderly, being one myself, but these reading lists and curricula have been drawn up by professors some decades ago, and no one in government has bothered to revisit and change them. So that's the story there. So public policy includes public administration, obviously. So one philosophical point to bear in mind is that we don't make a distinction between public policy and public administration. It is really a distinction without any difference, because if you formulate a policy, you formulate it in order for it to be to achieve its goals and to achieve its results, and that it can't unless it's properly implemented. So implementation issues must be taken into account in the design of the policy. Very often in India, we hear this statement, our policies are good, but implementation is bad. Now, that is not a sensible statement because if a policy cannot be properly implemented and doesn't achieve its results, you can't really say that the policy is good. It's bad. A good policy is one which gets properly implemented. So what it means is that when you're designing the policy, you must take into account how it's going to be implemented, who will implement it, what incentives and disincentives do they have to implement it. So we do not make a distinction in our program between policy design, policy formulation, and policy making, whatever term you use, and implementation of policy. So the general assumption when people say our policies are good, implementation is bad, by that they mean that the people who formulate policies are other brilliant people. Of course, if you've got 20 years service in the Indian administrative service and having entered a very competitive service, you must be smart and you're involved in policy making. If you're the chief economic advisor to the government and you're formulating economic policies, because obviously chief economic advisors to Government of India are all very intelligent people. So the assumption is when somebody intelligent formulates something, that must by definition be good. That's not the case, because somebody intelligent like the chief economic advisor may know nothing about what happens on the ground in reality. In fact, we've had chief economic advisors who've come in from teaching in the United States and have gone back to teaching. Arvind Subramaniam is one. We've had Arvind Panagaria, who came as the deputy chairman of Niti Aayog and went back to Columbia to teach. Now, you can't expect persons like that to have a pulse on the ground realities. So the policy they may formulate may not be well informed about implementation issues. So my point simply is that good policy formulation requires a very good understanding of ground realities, And so one of the things that we emphasize in our program is a grasp of how do you understand what's going on the ground and formulate policies. So we place a lot of emphasis, if you like, on what you might call experiential learning. We want our students to seize every opportunity to be able to first learn how to talk to village people, for instance, and to value the knowledge that village people have and to value advice that they may give. You see, it's often said that, it's only the wearer of the shoe who knows where it pinches, right? But now you want to design a policy to remove some obstacle or some damage that's being done to people. You need to know what it is that they're actually experiencing. And to do that, you need to be able to communicate with people. So one of the things that we have not done enough in our country in policy formulation is approach and consult the public in the formulation of policy. The assumption has just been that if you are intelligent and you're well-read and well-educated, or if you get a degree from a university in public policy, that qualifies you to make policy. But if you are unable to actually talk to people and understand from people what are the problems that they are experiencing and what they think might be solutions to the problems, you may not get your policy formulation right. So one of the skills that we want to inculcate in you is firstly, one of the virtues that you need to have is a sense of humility. That knowledge that is there with ordinary people, who are the ones you're trying to benefit by formulating policy. Public policy is intended to benefit the general public, but you must then respect the knowledge and advice that the general public may give you. Just to give you an example, if the general public have a high sense of insecurity and fear about a nuclear plant, in a democracy, you've got to give that weight. You can't say they don't know the first thing about nuclear physics. They don't really understand how safe a reactor is. And so we're going to go ahead and put the reactor anyway. Never mind what these people think. Their fears are irrational. Now, that's not a very humble attitude towards the people whom you're meant to serve. If you are meant to then explain to the people and allay their fears before you proceed with the policy, instead of assuming that their fears are irrational and they needn't be consulted or paid any attention to because you've been advised by scientists that your nuclear reactor is very safe and you can go ahead and install it, right? So I'm talking about an attitudinal shift, which is public policy must respect and value the public that policy is supposed to benefit. And in a way, policy is really about bringing about some kind of a desirable change in behavior. So quickly, your parents may make a policy at home that you do not continue to watch TV or remain on your gadgets after 11 p.m. And you must get at least 7 to 8 hours of good sleep. Now that's a very sensible and desirable policy that a family can enforce or try to enforce among its members. But what that means is that it's inducing a change in behavior. That if you are prone to stay up till 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. playing video games, it's not a good thing for your eyes or for your mental state. It's better that you get a good night's rest, right? That's a policy. So public policy is really about changing the behavior of the public so that they are benefited, the public is benefited. But philosophically, I'm insisting that we must understand how to value knowledge and advice that we can get from ordinary people, village women, the farmer, people running small enterprises, whichever subgroup, street vendors. So if you're formulating a policy on street vendors, it's a good idea to have a forum where you're able to listen to the views of street vendors and act accordingly. You know, not that they know everything, but they would be able to give you perspectives that matter for the eventual success of your policy. Let me illustrate that point with a narrative about the midday meal scheme in schools. The way this started, it started really in Tamil Nadu, when the government of a former chief minister called Annadurai started it in a very small way, but didn't really emphasize the program. And then the great film star in Tamil Nadu, M.G. Ramachandran, decided to join politics. He joined the DMK and then broke away from the DMK and started the ADMK, which is called the Anna DMK, because he felt that the DMK was not true to the values of its founder, C.N. Annadurai. And having got elected, he made two promises to the electorate, MGR. One, he said he will stop the indignity of hand-pulled, man-pulled the rickshaws, where somebody will sit in the rickshaw and as if you're a cow or a camel, a man will draw the rickshaw and take people from place to places, which we had. And in a way that underlines the indignity of a human being, that one human being is sitting there like a lord and another one like a beast of burden is dragging that person. So MGR promised that he will remove this all hand-pulled rickshaws from the state and give to each of them who made a living by being a rickshaw puller a cycle rickshaw, because it's more dignified to be driving a bicycle. It's like driving a motor car. It's a vehicle. You're not of course you're expending energy, but you're converting that energy into a more efficient form of transmission in a cycle with a chain and gears. And therefore, he decided he would do that. And then he said that since when he went to school, was often hungry and couldn't pay attention to what the teacher was saying because he was hungry, he felt that every child attending a public school supported by the government must get a meal in the school that's nutritious. Okay, so two policies. Now, the first one was relatively easy to implement. The government simply said, we will buy at government cost a whole lot of cycle rickshaws. And the moment somebody comes and says, here is my hand-pulled rickshaw, which I have been using, I will now stop using it. Please give me a cycle rickshaw in exchange. And the government would hand over a cycle rickshaw to that person, and that person would continue with his livelihood as a rickshaw karan or a rickshaw puller without the indignity of being a beast of burden. Now, the second one was more problematic. Now, all the teachers in the state said, no, we can't convert our schools into canteens and cook meals here, hot food, and serve it to the students. As it is, we have space constraints, we have classroom constraints, and this idea is absolutely mad, can't be implemented. So the teachers' unions protested. The civil servants protested and said it's, a logistical challenge to supply, dal and rice and vegetables to every school, and to set up a kitchen in the school. It's a mad idea. Children should eat at home. They'll make a mess in the school if they ate inside the school. We can't do it. Right. So, but then the chief minister told the officials and the teachers, everybody, he said that he will not authorize any expenditure and any payment of any salary to anybody in the state unless they came up with a scheme that would work and guarantee every child a meal in the school. Now that made a big difference, because basically he's saying you either come up with a scheme that will work and implement it, or you'll not get your salary, no matter which part of government you are. I'm not authorizing expenditure for health. I'm not authorizing expenditure for public works to build roads. I am going on what he called a pen down strike. I will not sign any file authorizing any expenditure until a scheme is drawn up for the supply of midday meal schemes in Tamil Nadu. And so the very people who objected to this managed to creatively find solutions to the problems that they were anticipating, that they knew are there, but they put their heads into it and worked out a system that works. And today, Tamil Nadu has a very good policy in midday meals, and it also is very good in implementing it. Why? Because the people who are meant to implement the policy were the ones who were drawn into formulating the policy, into providing the details of that policy as to how it should work. So it was not done top down, it was done bottom up, and to this day it works very well. Much later, the Supreme Court of India decided this is such a good thing. Oh, but I must also mention here that since I worked in the United Nations, one of the UN agencies, which is the UNFPA, which deals with population, and they went to, and UNICEF, which deals with children and mothers, they went to the chief minister and said, the real challenge in the country is preschool children and infants. Infant children don't get enough nutrition, and therefore they don't develop their full mental capabilities. And so giving meals to a child who's over the age of 5 is not as important as it is to care for a newborn child and make sure it has enough nutrition. So if you have scarce resources and you want to allocate the money, think about newborn children and their nutrition instead of a midday meal. And I must say I was very impressed that Mr. M.G. Ramachandran, who has not gone to university or college or got a public policy degree, told the United Nations officials, he said, yes, what you say is right, but if I give a meal to a girl child in school from the age of 5 until she reaches until she reaches the 10th standard, because at that time we did not have the +2. The +2 was pre-university and in a college. So school ended in 10 years. So his view was, if for 10 years I provided a nutritious meal to a girl child, when she comes to childbearing age, she would have been properly nourished, and her baby will not be born underweight and in need of this nutritional support that you're recommending to me. So my program will benefit children who are yet to be born, newborns. I'll think about doing something for infant nutrition, but you cannot use that as an objection to my policy, which is to provide nutritious meals to all children, especially girl children who will eventually bear children themselves, who needn't be underweight and in need of extra nutrition and run the risk of wasting and stunting in their growth and development. So whereas now later in many states, the Supreme Court of India thinks it's such a great policy as a part of the right to food, it decreed that many states, all states should provide midday meals. But they don't work very well in all those states. In Bihar, it doesn't work very well. There are stories of children dying of poisoning and substandard food and so on. Why? Because they are doing it top down. The Supreme Court has directed it. The people implementing the policy don't really, and the leaders in the states don't really have their heart in it. are not passionate about it, as was Mr. M.G. Ramachandran about this particular program in his state. So we need to understand these things, right? And in order to improve the quality of policy making and policy implementation in our country. And that's what our program aims to do, that it aims to enable you to understand that it's very important to consult and to learn and to get the viewpoint of those whom policy is intended to benefit. Another philosophical point, and I'll stop and let you ask questions, and that has to do with we are conceiving public policy in the school as a practice. Now, let me explain what I mean by the word practice. We say, and you'll all understand, that law is a practice. You take to the practice of law. We say medicine is a practice. We take to the practice of medicine. The word is used for law and medicine. And we also say that we take to the practice of teaching, which is a practice, teaching, right? So these are the noble professions from early on, teaching, healing, and protecting the rights of a person, upholding justice, have been considered to be a noble profession. And all these noble professions have, if you like, a sense of internal standards of ethics. That is, doctors swear to what is called the Hippocratic Oath, where they agree that in the practice of medicine, when they work as doctors, they will respect some ethical principles. In other words, they will prescribe medicines that will heal you, not medicines that that may heal you, but are very expensive because they have been bribed by some pharmaceutical company to prescribe the more expensive medicine, when in fact there is a much cheaper substitute for the same medicine. Now, that's unethical practice. You're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to disclose in details and information about somebody's health to somebody else. You must keep it confidential. These are ethical practices in medicine. Likewise, the Bar Council of India has a code of ethics that's drawn up for the practice of lawyers. It's another matter whether lawyers adhere to that code of ethics or doctors adhere to that code of ethics. But nonetheless, these ethical principles of conduct are important. Equally, these principles apply to teachers as a practice. You're not supposed to have favorites among your students. You're supposed to objectively evaluate the performance of students. You must treat all students equally. You must not favor some and discriminate against others. These are principles, and you must, if someone doesn't understand a point and asks a question, you must explain that to that, because your main objective is to teach and to enable learning, not to say I've talked for 1 hour and I've done my job. That's not the end of the story. You are meant to make sure your students have learned something that you intended them to learn. So these are ethical principles. Now, when it comes to public policy, I believe we need to have some ethical principles of that kind, to treat public policy as if it were a practice, and to say that this is being done for the good of the public. So it is not done for you don't make public policy for selfish reasons. You're not interested in public policy because you're self-interested. You are interested in public policy because you care about others, and you are interested in the welfare of others. So another example might be, say, for instance, a game, cricket or chess, could be considered to be a practice, right? So when you're playing chess and your opponent makes a brilliant move, you kind of appreciate the brilliance of the move. Even though that move may make you lose, you still appreciate it because you're not playing the game for money or some other kind of recognition. You're playing it for the joy of it. But if you do play it for money or some other recognition, then you're not treating that game as a practice. That means if you're playing cricket, gentlemen cricketers, as they are known, will, even if the referee, the umpire gives the person out, they think that the wicketkeeper knows the ball didn't touch the bat when he caught the ball. They would say they won't appeal. They would say somebody else may appeal from far away, but the wicketkeeper would say, signal the umpire that the ball didn't touch the bat. Now, that's an honorable thing to do because your aim is to beat the other side, but you also want to observe the rules of the game. So, philosophically, we'd like to treat public policy in our school as a practice and inculcate some ethical norms and values in all of you, so that no matter how you become a public policy practitioner, you could become a public policy practitioner by joining a research think tank, by joining the CSR initiative of a corporation, or indeed by joining a corporation and working on its public policy divisions, or by joining the government and entering government and making policy for the government, or by joining an NGO which is interested in education, health, well-being, poverty eradication, or whatever. All these areas where your training, your knowledge, and your skills will come in very useful and can be applied. So it's a very applied knowledge course. In other words, you're meant to apply the knowledge that you acquire, not knowledge for its own sake. So that's the background to why we have this program. You have to draw insights from a number of disciplines that will illuminate your understanding of policy issues. You cannot eliminate poverty only by knowing economics, or only by knowing political science, or only by knowing anthropology or sociology. In order to tackle a problem of poverty, you need to draw insights from all of these disciplines and also have a good sense of practical judgment and learn how to learn from people themselves, people who are experiencing problems, right? So in order to give you that kind of practical orientation, we have the option for students of doing a dissertation, which is good because it's a good discipline to be able to do research, to understand evidence, and to draw inferences from evidence, because public policy in our country very often is not based on solid evidence. But in fact, unfortunately, they manufacture evidence to defend the policy after the policy is implemented. So what we witness very often is policy-based evidence manufacturing rather than basing the policy on evidence. So you learn about how to treat evidence. So research is a very good way of being able to appreciate what the data is telling you, what inferences you can draw from evidence that you gather through quantitative methods or qualitative methods. We also send some students off to do a capstone project, which is to actually work in an institution and to try and apply the knowledge that you've got for the benefit of something that institution is working. So then you learn how to work in a team, how to work with others, how to actually use your knowledge, how to use your sense of practical judgment. And you'll be judged by an external evaluator. You're not going to be judged by your professors there. You have to prove that you've learned well and you are actually useful to some institution. And very often the institutions that find that you do that well are very likely to offer you a job straight away and say, continue doing what you've been doing because you're doing it rather well. And one of the things that kind of an exposure teaches you is it teaches you not to be competitive. It teaches you that teamwork is important. It teaches you that you can achieve results only if you're able to collaborate with others and get on with other people and get them to work with you. So all these are very important, lessons that are not, to be found in a textbook, but are part of the experience of studying a master's degree in public policy in this school. And I must say that having worked for nearly 30 years in policy making for the United Nations, and then therefore the United Nations advises governments on policies. Having done that, I find that the most fulfilling part of my work is in the school, because it's a commitment to training and creating a new generation of policymakers of a kind that our country very badly needs, because there's an awful lot that's wrong with the way policies are framed and policies are implemented in our country. Not everybody, not all political leaders make policy in the way that Mr. M.G. Ramachandran, the film star, did for the good of children in Tamil Nadu. So I'll stop there and take some questions.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Joshi Pranav wants to have some question. Joshi, unmute yourself.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Switch on your video also.
Yes, ma'am. The video is on. I hope you're able to see me.
Yep,
Sure.
I can.
Yes. So my question is regarding policy making, the documentation aspect of it. Often we see that policy, when it is framed, is very jargonized in its language, and it is very difficult to comprehend the terms that are being used. Even for students like me who are undergraduates in economics, I find it quite pain when I read policy. So as effective policymakers of the future, what points should we keep in consideration that an 18-year-old or a 19-year-old at least can get a sense of what is being said in the document?
Right. That's a good question. That reminds me that one of the courses we put you through is writing. We call it academic writing, but it's really about how to write clearly in using plain language. Unfortunately, because disciplines have become specialized, and the economist wants to be able to write in a language that he thinks a non-economist should not understand. That it should only be understood by economists. Now, that's not very useful if it's public policy. The public policy should be intelligible to the public and not written in arcane language. Now, one of the things you need to be able to do is to have enough literacy, say in economics and in these social science disciplines, to be able to make sense of what these economists are saying, right? Because they have something to say, but unfortunately, they tend to say it in jargonized language. Lawyers tend to do that. Unnecessarily, they will use Latin phrases for things. They will say habeas corpus, quo warranto, mandamus, and so on, so that the poor client who's actually paying them doesn't have any idea what's going on. Now, these are unfortunate aspects of professions that are practices that have got institutions that manage them, like the Bar Council or the Bureau of the Cricket BCCI. Now, these institutions are prone to corruption, right? The game itself is a practice. Cricket as a game is beautiful, right? But the institution that manages it can be corrupt. That Bar Council could be corrupt. The Architects Council could be corrupt. So we need to be able to, firstly, because the world is like that, you need to be able to understand this language, but not use that language. So a new generation of policymakers ought to be able to write policy in simple, plain language that can be translated to 22 languages in this country. If I start using habeas corpus, mandamus, and so on, it's difficult to translate it, right? So that's the first point. And therefore, we do pay some attention in the course to the ability to be able to write. And then you got to, even if you write a dissertation, you should be able to say in one page in front, in an abstract, what it is that the dissertation is saying, right? Because the policymaker or the decision maker is, I'm not going to read your whole tome. He will
Yes.
read or she will read one page. So
Yes.
these are skills that you need to cultivate, and they come with practice. The more you do that, the better you would become doing it. But there is, as I said, within government, a kind of a status quoist attitude. I once worked with Bibek Debroy, who is now an advisor to the Prime Minister. And Bibek and I, we rewrote the Criminal Procedure Code and the Civil Procedure Code in plain English, right? And we even printed it. We had on the one side the Criminal Procedure Code as it was drafted by Thomas Babington Macaulay in 1860. And then on the right-hand side, we had it written in plain English. And we told the law ministry, why don't you adopt plain language to formulate your laws? But because they have been trained in law and they think that, they are adding value to somebody else, if they write something just in plain English, it doesn't look as if a lawyer has looked at it. So they didn't take it up. But, but that must be taken up. That is one of the things I would say. So I'm glad you mentioned what you did.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
The next
Anyone
one
else?
who has raised the hand, please tell your name and unmute yourself because we don't have your display name.
Hello.
Yeah, who's that?
Hello, sir. I'm Archishman from West Bengal.
Okay.
Am I audible?
Yes, sure.
Can we request
Sir,
you to switch on your video also?
sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, ma'am. So, as far as I know, that implementing policy is a very good thing, and the most important thing for the policy is to monitor and scrutinize how the policy is working. And as far as I have worked for a private hospital, I have seen several issues regarding the health policies like Swasthya Sathi and Ayushman Bharat. So, what could be the best and the possible way to solve those issues and the queries of the common people to know to develop the policies?
Well, you see, I think I spent a lot of time explaining that as to why it is that you need to be able to involve those who are going to be implementing your policy when you're formulating the policy. My story about M.G. Ramachandran and the success of the midday meal scheme in Tamil Nadu is that he managed to get those who objected to it and who said it's impossible, it can't be done, it can't be implemented, to actually come and draw up the details of that policy as to how it could be implemented. And because those who knew what the obstacles are the ones who were able to tackle it. But this requires an attitudinal shift. And we need to bring this about, and it will take time to happen because we have a very top-down style of governance. And we also have a civil service where there's a general tendency, it's a generalist civil service. So an IAS officer can one day be Secretary Education, and the next day he could be transferred to the Department of Animal Husbandry or to the Space Research Center or whatever. And they don't know enough of the details of the kind that you experience, say, in the private hospital where you worked. So a health secretary may not really know that. And so we need to figure out ways by which we do good evaluations of existing policies and publicize them. Good evaluations are actually done, incidentally, by the Office of the Controller and Auditor General of India, because they don't just audit the accounts, they also audit performance of different departments, and they make very good recommendations. Unfortunately, they are simply tabled in the assembly, in the state or parliament, in the union government, and nobody actually follows up on recommendations to the extent that they should be. And we don't do enough evaluation of. So one of the things we emphasize in our program, Milindo was here, but he's left us. Milindo teaches project evaluation and program evaluation. So we need more people with the skills to be able to evaluate what's going wrong in the implementation of the policy and provide feedback to policymakers. So we are, in a way, I'd say that governance in India still lacks some crucial capabilities. And one of the roles and objectives of higher education institutions is to train people with those capabilities that government can draw upon in whatever way. And there should be many more high quality public policy master's programs in the country than we presently do.
Thank you, sir.
Anybody else?
Do we have anyone else who wants to ask any question?
Well, it's not just a question, you can say something.
Noinika,
Yes.
please, you can.
My name is, I'll just turn the camera on. Hello. Thank you,
Hi,
sir.
hello.
Hello. My name is Nayanika. Thank you so much for this wonderful 1 hour session. It was really, really invigorating. I was just thinking that as an undergraduate, I just finished my economics undergraduate. I was just thinking that public policy is so multifaceted and that it has so many interdisciplinary values that are required to understand it. And when you think about, I personally can't think of even one avenue in the Indian space where you can't use public policy. In gender development and rural urban development and climate change policies. I mean, it's a multifaceted issue. And as someone who's about to study public policy, I find it slightly daunting to try to understand so many different things, which many people study years to understand the crucial, like at an in-depth level. Do you have anything to say about that with your experience?
Yeah, I do, in fact. We've designed a program where the first thing that is emphasized is learning how to learn, right? Now, if you need to get some insights from anthropology, you need to be able to have enough exposure. You don't need to become a first-rate anthropologist yourself, but you need to know what to pick. So if you're dealing, say, with tribal policy, and you need to say, okay, now how do I educate myself there? By a sense of judgment, you'd say, I will read Verrier Elwin, who was an Englishman who was influenced by Gandhi. He lived among the tribals. He married a tribal woman in Madhya Pradesh. Then he moved to, who passed away, and then he moved to the Northeast and married a woman there in another tribe. And he was asked by the first Prime Minister of India to be the advisor for the Northwest Frontier Province, right? Now, and if you come and do a program with us, you'll know that if you need to educate yourself about ways and mores of tribal people, you can't read everything that's written about tribal people all over the world. You need to be able to be selective and read what's going to give you insights very nicely and very quickly, right? So you learn that, right, by spending 2 years. Because we are an interdisciplinary faculty, you'll know why it is useful to learn what Foucault, Michel Foucault, the French intellectual, has had to say when he uses a phrase like governmentality, right? He invented that word. It's a mentality that is peculiar to governments, right? Now, if you grasp that, you will immediately sense, you can see when governmentality is in play, right? When you look around and see what's happening. So it's that you need to know. You need to know enough of a number of disciplines, but more important than that, you need to know where you can get the kernel or the essence in these disciplines. Otherwise you could be wasting your time, reading commentaries. You see, very often reading the original classics is better than reading, somebody else interpreting what somebody said, right? If you want to understand why religion is important to people, the element, the book by Emil Durkheim on religion will tell you everything you really need to know. Why it is people have faith, what does it mean, why did the tribals have totems, what purpose, the social purpose does it serve in society. If you want to get those insights, you need to read some classics. We don't need to read, dozens of things. So it's an art that you cultivate, that you pick up. And the best people to help you pick up are our faculty, because they have an interdisciplinary orientation and they know how to do it. All right. So I'm saying that in my case, I learned it all the wrong way around. I did economics, then I got a Rhodes Scholarship. I went to Oxford. I did a year of philosophy. So I'm very good and like political philosophy a lot. Then I did 2 years in politics or political science. Then I spent 6 years in Cambridge University studying constitutional law, because all policy is translated into law. The only way you can implement a policy with enforcement is by putting it in the form of a statute, a regulation, a gazette notification or something. But then it goes into a set of actors who are reading it, who have not been involved in the formulation of the policy. They don't know why. So what is the High Court of Delhi telling the University Grants Commission and Delhi University how they should run their institutions, right? They don't get it right. But because it is in the form of a UGC Act and the Delhi University Act, it gets into another forum. So one of the things you need to understand is what happens when law policies get into that stage where they are questioned on the grounds of constitutionality or something like that. So we have one of the first courses that you'll do is law, governance, and institutions. It is simply to get a handle on this. So you need to be able to read a judgment in that course. You're not a lawyer, but you still need to be able to read a judgment and not read. Our judgments, unfortunately, are hundreds of pages. But you need to be able to read what is the brief note heading, which is a good law journal that gives you a good head note that summarizes the critical legal points and saves you from wasting time reading 200 pages, right? Those are the skills that you pick up. It's a knack, but you'll get it.
Right. Thank you. Thank you.
Next, we have Purva Israni. Purva, you can unmute yourself and switch on your video.
Am I audible, ma'am?
Yep. Hello.
Yes, good morning, sir. I had a question that when we talk about evidence-based public policy making in the Indian context, is it that the scientific evidence is limited to us, or is it that it is present and not being used efficiently? And on the radar of evidence-based public policy making, where does India stand?
Well, it's not just India. Many governments have difficulty using evidence to formulate policy. One of the reasons for that is that they don't spend enough time doing it. Because a political leader may say, I want something announced on 15th August. And policymakers are scrambling to say, what can they announce on 15th August? I want on 15th August to announce what would be the vaccine distribution scheme. I'm anticipating that our Prime Minister will do that on 15th August. Say we will put in place a system in this country whereby vaccines are distributed equitably to people, so that it's not only the rich and the powerful who will get it, but everyone will get it, right? Now, if you if you today you tell your advisors, come up with a policy that I will announce this policy. Now they'd be scrambling to look at what is the evidence, right? So one of the reasons policies neglect evidence is that they are formulated too hastily. Political compulsions, dates, these things happen. These are practical difficulties, but over time you can tackle them, you can deal with them. And evidence is not simply scientific. It's not simply what the epidemiologists say. And even there, for instance, with coronavirus, the epidemiologists in Sweden took a completely different view from the epidemiologists in other countries. In Sweden, they took the view, let's not panic and let's not go overboard, locking up everything and shutting down everything. This is a virus. Yes, it's a particularly nasty one. But there have been other viruses, and human beings and the human body has a capacity to develop antibodies and adapt it. And so if a certain large number of people do get exposed and they develop antibodies, you are then sort of, getting what is called a herd immunity. Now, that's one view. That's one kind of evidence. Another kind of evidence is, listen, if you do this and you will have unnecessarily people dying, whereas if you prevented the spread of the infection and you tested people and took them for treatment, you may be able to save their lives instead of some persons unfortunately dying because you're taking a rather casual attitude towards it, right? So it's a question of how you use your practical judgment as to say what kind of evidence will I act upon. So evidence itself is something that calls for judgment. Evidence doesn't directly tell you what your policy should be, but you must be able to defend your policy by pointing to evidence. And one of the evidences that we neglect, as I emphasized in the course of my talk, is talking to actually the people you're meant to benefit. Whatever policy it is, you must first know, if you say, what if we do this, right? We will then understand what to do. Now, you see, as an afterthought, we now have one ration card for the whole nation. Right? If you have one citizenship for the whole nation, somebody could have conceived of one ration card for the whole nation long ago without this coronavirus pandemic having to teach us that lesson, right? It could have been done if you only went and talked to people. You didn't talk to people. You didn't know that people have a ration card which they leave behind at home and they're going and working in some other state. They don't have the ration card. The family has the rations, but they are not getting the ration. So then they are stuck in a lockdown. They can't go anywhere. How are they going to get some, rations? Then you think, we'll make this ration card universal so that even if you are in another state, you can drop on it. Now, this is an afterthought, right? Now, if you only talk to people, if you took migrant workers seriously and knew where they are, had some understanding of demographics, figured out how many people are working in other places, did a survey. One of the ways of gathering evidence is survey. Now, unfortunately, we in recent times, we have undervalued the capacity of our national sample survey system. It's one of the best in the world. India was responsible, I know this personally, for helping the United Nations to set up a statistical system so that all countries of the world can produce comparable statistics on the sorts of things on, say, on human development, education, health, and so on. We did that for the UN, but in our own country, we are now increasingly devaluing the value of a very, very good statistical system. So the habits of government are bad in the sense that the statistical officer is considered to be a low-level person. He's not as important as the district collector. He's not as important as secretary to government. He's a statistician, poor chap, and they don't even consult them. So when you'll be talking to, you should ask Sandeep Dikshit, who will talk to you next. He's my vice dean. I worked with Sandeep on the first human development report for Madhya Pradesh. And of course, you need evidence to be able to say something about the state of human development report in Madhya Pradesh. So we talked to the statistics people in Madhya Pradesh because this was a directive from above. The chief minister wanted the human development report. Sandeep was heading an NGO called Sanket, which worked on it. And I was in UNDP, which started the human development reports, assisting Sandeep and his team. So we met statistics people, and they were absolutely surprised that they were called by the district collector to come to his office, right? They said, we've never been called. This is the first time we are being called, right? Now, this is because, the district collector, in the course of doing his job, didn't think it's necessary to call the chief statistical officer in the district and consult him about the evidence. What is the data saying about this or that, right? So it needs a kind of a attitudinal change to value evidence. So evidence-based policy making sounds nice, but it's not so easy to implement. And also in the gathering of evidence, we need to make some reforms. One of the things I learned with Sandeep in Madhya Pradesh, we had a meeting of secretaries dealing with statistics departments from different states, and there was one who later became my colleague in the UN called Anuradha Rajivan. She was in charge of statistics in Tamil Nadu. And she had the story to tell us that she was once sitting there looking at the livelihood census, and she found that it reported a very large number of camels in Tamil Nadu. So she called their statistics officers and said, how is it possible that Tamil Nadu has so many camels? I mean, this is not Rajasthan. So why are you guys reporting that we have so many camels? So the answer she got from them is like this. See, madam, there is a column for camels in the form you sent to us. Now, who knows, there may be a circus in our district with 3 or 4 camels. So we think we put a small number there, 3 or 4. But many statistics officers filling that form in different parts of the state have all inserted a number that they think, is reasonable. There could be a few camels, and you add them all up, it comes to a big number, right? What it means is nobody has told, firstly, you don't need to have a column on camels in a livestock survey in Tamil Nadu. You can leave it out. Secondly, you need to help the statistics officer to understand why it is you're collecting this information and what will it be used for, right? If that person knew that, he knows then I am doing something that's going to be useful. That based on my work, somebody else is going to make some decisions. And those decisions are going to be helpful to people. Now, if you don't do that, and you demotivate people and say you're just clerks who are filling up numbers in columns and adding them up, then you're devaluing the people who collect and gather evidence. So in all of these things, we need an attitudinal shift. It's possible. That's why, if you, after graduation here in whatever walk of life you take up, remember these things and say, when somebody is asked to do any work, that person needs to know, what is the point of me doing this work? Doesn't matter what it is, right? My vice chancellor likes to tell the story about John Kennedy visiting NASA. And he came across a janitor who was cleaning the floors with a mop. And he stopped and he asked his janitor, what do you do here? And she answered him saying, I'm helping these people put man on the moon, right? See, so that is a motivation, right? Someone who thinks that their work is contributing to something important and useful, they will be honest in the gathering of data and evidence, right? So these things have to happen. I hope that.
Thank you, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you.
We can have the last question from Sandeep Saha.
All right. Where is Sandeep Saha?
I hope he's there. Yeah, he's there. Sandeep, are you there? He has left. So.
All right. Good.
Yeah.
Then we'll close. Hemant, thank you very much.
Right, sir. Thank you very much for your, again, a wonderful, wonderful session. And students are eagerly looking forward to join us. And we hope to see them very soon on campus.
But they've got a whole program to complete. They should listen to our other faculty and so encourage them to join, because even though it's not a formal course, it still gives it's a trailer to what's to come.
Yes, certainly.
Picture abhi baki hai. Tell them that.
Certainly, certainly. Right, sir. Thank you very much. Mani, thank you. Thank you, students, and hope to see you after 15 minutes to join Professor Sandeep Dikshit on a very interactive session. Thank you very much.
Right.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Mani.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for joining us, everyone. Thank you.